We were struck by the words of Milt Heflin, the mission's chief flight director. This is a bad day, he said. I'm glad that I'm working and live in a country where, when we have a bad day, we are able to fix it. So this we know. Going back into space is not a question of if, it's a question of when. And of course, it is also a question of how. Here again, CNN's John Zurella.
The Space Shuttle Atlantis was next scheduled to fly. March 1st was the target date. Atlantis was to bring a fresh replacement crew up to the International Space Station. That won't be happening now, not for a while. But while the shuttle program may be grounded, the space program is not.
We're still flying in space. We have a crew on orbit right now, and we have a space station on orbit, and they also deserve our full attention to ensure that they have a safe and productive mission.
But at some point, NASA and its space station partners must decide how to bring Commander Ken Bowersox, Nikolai Budarin, and Donald Pettit home. A Russian Progress resupply ship is on its way now to the station with enough food and supplies to last the crew until June.
They've got a lot to do, and it just wouldn't be right to quit.
And at this point, there's no reason to consider unmanning the station. We have sufficient supplies. We're able to communicate and perform and function as planned. We're early in our investigation on the shuttle.
But if, come June, the shuttle fleet is still grounded, then a Russian Soyuz spacecraft would be their way home and the ride up for a new crew. It's the only other space vehicle capable of carrying humans back and forth to the station. NASA says it's keeping Commander Bowersox and his partners on board the space station informed about everything going on back on Earth.
I told Sox I wouldn't keep anything from him. Anything that I knew down here on the ground about what was going on, he would know on orbit.
As difficult as this tragedy is for the NASA family on Earth to deal with, it's even tougher, NASA says, for the men in space. They are grieving alone. In the very early days of the space station program, when NASA and its international partners were putting together the plans for the space station, they knew they had to have more than one option for getting humans back and forth to the space station. It's either a Russian rocket or the space shuttle. Problem was, they never really thought that they would have to be employing perhaps one method or the other so soon. Aaron?
John, thank you. John Zurella. In Florida, those three astronauts up on the space station must be the loneliest people in the universe right now. John, thank you very much. Later on Newsnight, we'll talk with veteran shuttle astronaut Norm Thagard. And coming up next, the Columbia story and the reaction to it as it is seen around the world. This is Newsnight from Houston. It's amazing to remember that the early days of the space program, space travel, was all mixed up in the politics of the Cold War, but those of us of a certain age remember very well that it was two enemies racing against each other for supremacy in space. These days, space travel is more about bringing people of the world together, and the crew of Columbia was absolute proof of that. There was Ilan Ramon, who brought some of Israel's history on board with him, a drawing of a moonscape by a young boy killed in Auschwitz. And there was Kalpana, who moved to the United States and became a citizen. But one city in northern India will always remember her as a hometown hero. Here's CNN's Satinder Bindra.
They come to grieve, they come to promise. Kalpana Chawla will never be forgotten. In her hometown of Karnal, northern India, hundreds gather to pay their respects to the city's most famous citizen.
Of course, our city and our college and our students and our professors have lost a star, and the star will be shining in the sky for all times to come.
At Kalpana's old school, many students had gathered to welcome her back to Earth. Then news of the space shuttle's accident quickly transformed their joy into grief.
She never forgot that she was from Karnal, that she was from this school, and that is why it hurts so much.
What also hurts these mourners is Kalpana, who's better known here by her nickname Mantu, was only 41 and had so much to live for. Soon after graduating from this school in Karnal, Kalpana earned a bachelor's degree in aeronautical engineering. Then in 1982, she migrated to the United States, where she received her PhD. In 1994, she was selected for the NASA program. From a small, simple town in northern India to the heart of America's space program, she had come a long way. Just before leaving on her first space mission in 1997, Kalpana asked the president of her former college in India for the school's flag, explaining she wanted to carry it with her in space. 5 years after that incident, it's still fresh in the minds of her friends. They tell me, for all her fame, Kalpana remained humble, never forgetting her roots. Months before her last and fatal space journey, Kalpana invited 2 students from her old school to visit NASA.
When I've gone over there, she has just inspired us to follow our dreams.
Kalpana's achievements made her a role model for millions of Indians. Those who knew her best, like school alumnus Sanpreet Kaur, share some memories and mementos.
Nights having that double value for me. So I just want to keep them with my heart always.
What she's also keeping is Kalpana's advice to follow her dreams. Sanpreet's already decided she too wants to be an astronaut. So even in death, Kalpana Chawla continues to inspire people. And for 1 billion Indians here, she's become a symbol that it's possible to dream, that it's possible to reach out and touch the stars. Already today, the Indian government has instituted 2 awards for academic excellence in her honor. Back to you.
Thank you very much. What a nice story that. Satinder Bindra in India tonight. Well, it isn't true that there are 2 sides to every story. Some stories, among them the one we're spending this night reporting on and talking and thinking about, have only one side. That's been the case even in places where there are leaders and people who aren't always inclined to see things as Americans see them. Outside the United States, too, almost as much as here, interestingly, the appearance yesterday of that terrible white scar against the blue sky has caused shock and anger and grief and pain. Here's a report on how the world has reacted from CNN's Anderson Cooper.
Around the world, the Columbia story was the lead. In Russia, at the American embassy in Moscow, a man in tears left a tribute of roses. And there were roses, too, at the Russian equivalent of Houston's Mission Control, where an unmanned rocket was about to be launched. More than a few of the scientists here personally knew members of Columbia's crew. American astronauts and Russian cosmonauts have flown together often in recent years. That, said Russian President Vladimir Putin, has made his country all the more sensitive to this tragedy. At the Vatican, Pope John Paul II said aloud what many people surely were saying to themselves.
The sorrowful news of the tragic explosion of the U.S. Space Shuttle Columbia when re-entering the atmosphere stirs up strong emotion in everyone. I invite all to pray for the victims of the accident, experts in carrying out an international scientific mission. In this moment of difficult trial, I am spiritually close to the families to whom I give assurances of remembrance and prayer.
On the other side of the world, in Australia, which had supplied some spiders for an experiment to be conducted aboard the shuttle, a teacher working with the Melbourne high school students involved in that experiment found herself having to talk to them not about spiders, but about death.
Initially, like I was, they were quite shocked and distraught, very upset. But after speaking to them just a few minutes ago on the phone, they're all coming to terms with it very slowly and realising the disaster that's happened.
Gerhard Schroeder of Germany and Jacques Chirac of France, who do not see eye to eye with Tony Blair of Great Britain on what to do about Iraq, did all agree about the loss of Columbia. It left the world, Schroeder said, united in grief. Anderson Cooper, CNN.
Coming up on this special edition of Newsnight, someone who knows the shuttle program inside and out. We'll talk with veteran shuttle astronaut Norm Thagard. But up next, an instant memorial here outside the Space Center in Houston. A short break. This is Newsnight on CNN.